Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something pretty interesting, actually.
Oh, yeah.
You shared some fascinating analysis of Sun Tzu's Art of War. And I have to say, this whole idea, strategic waiting, it's really intriguing. It's not exactly the first thing that comes to mind, when you think about military strategy.
Right.
This,
Not at all. It really does challenge our assumptions about what it means to win. We
yeah,
tend to think about victory as something that is seized aggressively, but this ancient text is suggesting a very different approach.
yeah. I was really struck by that phrase, first win, then fight. It seems almost backwards. Shouldn't the fighting come before the winning?
It's definitely counterintuitive. What Sun Tzu is highlighting here, I think, is the importance of positioning yourself strategically before you even engage in any kind of conflict. Think about like building a fortress. You make yourself invincible first, and then any potential victory is going to be built on that foundation of strength.
So it's less about brute force and more about creating the conditions for success.
Precisely. Forcing a win when you're not prepared is a recipe for disaster. That's why Sun Tzu emphasizes the power of knowing when not to fight.
So saying no can actually be like a powerful strategic move.
Absolutely. In the business world, for example, you see companies often make the mistake of trying to beat their competitors through direct attack. But Sun Tzu would argue that a wiser approach is to focus on building your own strengths and letting the competitors' weaknesses lead to their own downfall.
I'm curious though, are there any modern examples where this strategy has actually played out successfully? It's kind of hard to imagine how a smaller company, say, could ever win against a giant corporation without directly confronting them.
Well, think about the rise of streaming services. Initially, companies like Netflix, they focused on building their own content libraries and user-friendly platforms. They didn't directly attack traditional cable providers, but their success gradually shifted the entire entertainment landscape.
That's a great example. They kind of create a whole new playing field rather than trying to conquer the existing one. That waiting is often misunderstood as passivity, but it actually sounds incredibly active when you start talking about it.
Yeah, it's definitely not about sitting on the sidelines. True strategic waiting demands constant vigilance and analysis. It's about discerning when to hold back and when to strike. Clausewitz, actually, another brilliant military theorist, he compared waiting to the hidden foundation of military action, essential but often unseen.
That makes a lot of sense. Speaking of historical examples, from the Tang Dynasty,
Yeah.
about a rebellion in the defense of a crucial mountain pass.
Ah, yes, the story of General Ge Shuhan and Emperor Tang Xuanzong. This is a perfect illustration of how impatience can undermine even the most sound strategy.
Okay, so set the scene for us. What happened?
All right, so imagine this. A rebellion is raging, and General Ge Shuhan is tasked with defending a strategic mountain pass. From a military standpoint, he's in a very strong position. The rebels are unable to break through, and time is on his side.
But I have a feeling this is where the emperor's impatience comes in.
Mhm.
What led to his downfall?
Exactly. Emperor Tang Xuanzong, now blinded by pride and anger. He couldn't tolerate the idea of a lowly rebel, causing him this trouble. He demanded a swift victory and ordered Ge Shuhan to attack.
Oh no, I'm guessing that didn't end well.
It was a complete catastrophe. The general knew that they were safe holding the pass, but he was forced to obey the emperor's reckless command. The army was decimated, the pass was lost, and the emperor was forced to flee. All because he couldn't wait.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how emotions can just cloud judgment, even in a military context. And it makes you think, have you ever made a decision out of impatience or anxiety that just backfired spectacularly later? Seems like a trap we can all fall into. But it brings up a crucial question. In this context of strategic waiting, what exactly are we waiting for?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? We're not just waiting passively. There's a purpose to it. According to Sun Tzu, there are two key things that we're waiting for.
Okay, I'm all ears. This is where it gets really interesting.
The first thing is the cultivation of internal strength. We need to be prepared to have our resources, our skills, our strategy in place. It's like that saying, sharpen your axe before you chop wood.
Makes perfect sense. So it's about building a solid foundation before taking action. What's the second thing we're waiting for?
We're waiting for the enemy to make a mistake. We're looking for a crack in their armor, a moment of vulnerability, an opportunity to exploit.
So it's not just about being patient. It's about actively watching and analyzing, like a chess player studying their opponent's moves.
Exactly. We need to be vigilant and constantly assess the situation. The enemy's mistake might not be some grand blunder. It could be a subtle shift in strategy, a depletion of resources, or even a moment of hesitation.
So we're not just waiting for any opportunity, but for the right opportunity, the one that gives us a clear advantage.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes. The most strategic move is to not act immediately, but to wait for the situation to develop in a way that favors us.
This reminds me of something I read about venture capitalists. They often wait for startups to hit certain milestones before investing. Rather than just jumping in at the first sign of potential, they're looking for evidence of traction, a strong team in a market that's ready for the product.
That's a perfect parallel. Those investors are practicing strategic waiting. They're assessing the situation, gathering information, and looking for the right moment to make their move.
But this raises kind of an interesting question. What if we're in a situation where we can't afford to wait? What if time is of the essence?
That's where the art of judgment comes in. Sun Tzu acknowledges that not all situations allow for extended waiting. Sometimes you have to act decisively, even if the conditions aren't ideal.
So how do we balance this idea of strategic waiting with the need to act decisively when necessary? I imagine that's a pretty tricky line to walk.
It is. There's no easy formula, unfortunately. But it comes down to carefully weighing the risks and rewards, assessing the urgency of the situation, and trusting your instincts.
It sounds like in those situations, experience plays a huge role. The more you've been in those high-pressure moments, the better equipped you are to make a sound judgment call.
Experience definitely helps. But even for those who haven't faced many of those situations, there are things we can do to improve our judgment. One is to constantly study and learn from others who have been in similar situations. Another is to practice making decisions in lower stakes environments, so that when the pressure is on, we're better prepared to handle it.
So building that mental muscle memory for decision-making.
Exactly. It's about training ourselves to think strategically and to be comfortable with uncertainty. Because in real life, rarely do we have all the information we need to make a perfectly informed decision.
Makes me think about that saying, perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to make the absolute best decision that we end up paralyzed by indecision. But maybe the real victory is in making a good decision even if it's not perfect, especially when time is a factor.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes the most important thing is to act, even if it means taking a calculated risk.
This whole conversation is really shifting my perspective on what it means to win. It's less about brute force and more about a combination of patience, self-control, and calculated risk-taking. Almost like the biggest battle is the one we fight within ourselves, to overcome our own impatience anxieties and the urge to just react impulsively.
That's a profound insight, and aligns perfectly with Sun Tzu's emphasis on mastering one's own emotions. As a prerequisite for mastering the battlefield, remember that powerful line from The Art of War? The enemy is invincible. Only wait for their self-defeat.
Yeah, it's such a striking statement. So we're not just waiting for our own strength to build, but also for the enemy to create their own downfall through their actions. Or in some cases, their inaction.
Precisely, and that's why patience is so crucial. We have to resist the urge to rush in and potentially disrupt their self-destruction.
Right. But what if the enemy doesn't make a mistake? What if they play it perfectly, or at least avoid making any major blunders? Do we just wait forever?
That's where adaptability comes in. If the enemy remains strong, and we don't see any clear opportunities, we may need to adjust our strategy. Maybe we shift our focus to strengthening our own position, building alliances, gathering more information, or even finding a different battlefield where the conditions are more favorable.
So strategic waiting isn't a static concept. It requires constant reevaluation and adjustment based on the ever-changing circumstances.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process, not a rigid set of rules. And that's what makes it so powerful. It allows us to adapt to any situation and ultimately find a path to victory, even if it's not the one we initially envisioned.
You know, it's funny. This whole conversation about waiting and strategy, it makes me think about our modern world. It seems like we're just bombarded with information, pressure to make quick decisions, and this feeling that we need to be doing something all the time.
It's true. We live in a culture that prizes speed and constant action. But the wisdom of The Art of War suggests that sometimes the most strategic move is to pause, step back, and allow ourselves the time and space to observe and reflect.
It's almost like finding that stillness amidst the chaos, where we can see the bigger picture and make choices that are aligned with our long-term goals, rather than just reacting impulsively to the noise around us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And in that stillness, we can often find clarity, wisdom, and the patience to make decisions that lead to true, lasting success.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the power of saying no to the importance of self-control, the enemy defeating themselves, and the need to balance patience with decisive action. But I still keep coming back to this question. How do we actually apply all of this wisdom to our everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But I think the key is to start by recognizing the situations where this philosophy of strategic waiting might be applicable.
So, for example, instead of impulsively jumping into a new job just because it's offered, maybe we take the time to really assess if it aligns with our long-term goals and values.
Exactly. Or maybe it's about resisting the urge to react immediately to a conflict with a colleague or loved one. Instead, we create space to understand the situation more fully and respond in a way that's both strategic and compassionate.
Or even in our personal relationships. Maybe it's about recognizing when someone needs space and giving them that space, rather than trying to force a resolution or a conversation before they're ready.
That's a great example. Sometimes the most loving and supportive thing we can do is to practice strategic waiting in our relationships, trusting that the other person will come to us when they're ready to connect, or to work through a challenge.
I'm starting to see how this philosophy can be applied to so many different aspects of our lives. From our careers, relationships, to our personal growth and decision-making. It's really quite versatile. But I still feel like there's so much to unpack here, so much to ponder. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
I think what's resonating with me most is this idea that strategic waiting isn't about being passive or timid. It's actually like a very proactive and deliberate approach to navigating challenges and achieving our goals.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that true strength often lies in restraint, in choosing our battles wisely, and in only engaging when the conditions are truly in our favor.
So it's not about never acting, but about acting with intention, purpose, and a deep understanding of the situation.
Precisely. It's about mastering the art of timing, of knowing when to strike and when to hold back.
And it all comes back to that powerful line from The Art of War. The enemy is invincible. Only wait for their self-defeat. Right. It's a reminder that we can't force victory. We can create the conditions for it. But ultimately, the enemy's downfall often comes from their own actions, their own missteps, or their own inability to adapt.
So instead of trying to control everything and everyone around us, maybe the wisest approach is to focus on mastering ourselves, on cultivating our own internal strength, and on creating a foundation that sets us up for success.
That's beautifully articulated. Because when we are strong and prepared, we are less likely to be swayed by those external pressures or to react impulsively out of fear or insecurity.
It's almost like that saying, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. By cultivating that inner stillness, we can perceive opportunities and threats more clearly and make decisions that are aligned with our long-term vision.
And in that space of stillness, we can also tap into our intuition and wisdom, those inner guides that often point us in the right direction, even when the path ahead seems uncertain.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on what it means to be strategic and how patience can be such a powerful tool for achieving our goals. I want to challenge you, our listener, to reflect on a situation in your own life where the principles of strategic waiting might apply. Maybe it's a career decision you're facing, a relationship challenge you're navigating, or even just a small, everyday choice.
Take a moment to consider what it would look like to approach that situation with more patience, observation, and a willingness to wait for the right opportunity to present itself.
And perhaps the most profound question to contemplate is this: what if true victory is less about conquering others and more about mastering ourselves?
What if our greatest triumphs come not from brute force or aggression, but from cultivating our inner strength, patience, and wisdom?
It's definitely a thought-provoking question to ponder as we move forward in our lives. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into strategic waiting. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the power of patience in your own life.